The king has no heartbeat, no blood, no sleep, no hunger. And every night he stands alone in the darkness like a corpse that refuses to fade. No one knows this secret except me, because I know who is living inside that body. 10 years ago, I was the one who pointed at him and sent him to his death. I thought everything ended the day he died, until he summoned me to the palace, until those eyes looked straight into mine, and I realized the one who died that year never came back for revenge. He came back, only to find me. I heard news of the new king from a drunk at a roadside tavern, on a rainy night that wasn't worth remembering. A new king on the throne, cold as stone, the entire court too afraid to breathe. He told it with the voice of someone who had witnessed something they still hadn't recovered from. I didn't care. 10 years of wandering, I'd heard every kind of story about every kind of king. None of them had anything to do with me, and I had long since gotten used to nothing having anything to do with me. I picked up my cup, about to drink. Then the drunk lowered his voice and let something slip, the kind of thing that touches a forbidden subject without the speaker quite understanding why it's forbidden. Word is, the king has been sending people to search the whole kingdom for a prophet. I set the cup down, slowly, giving nothing away, but inside me, in that place that had been cold and still and dark for 10 years, something had just woken up. I have a bad habit I can't seem to shake. Every morning, I sit in a corner of the market and watch people walk by, not out of curiosity, not out of loneliness, but because the mortal eye opens the way a person breathes, and I've long since stopped having the strength to fight it. A merchant passes, 23 days appears above his head, clear as ink on paper. An old woman selling vegetables smiles brightly at a customer, 407 days. A guard yawning on patrol, 11 days. I pull my hat lower. 10 years carrying this alone, no one to share the weight, no one to tell. I've learned exactly one thing that's actually useful. Knowing when others will die does nothing for the day I want to die. Because I can't die. Not that I don't dare, it's that something keeps holding me here, stubborn and invisible. Like roots grown so deep no one can pull them out. A child runs past, nearly colliding with my leg. I turn away immediately. Some things, even if you can see them, you shouldn't let yourself see. They came at dusk, when the light had just gone out but the dark hadn't fully fallen yet. I knew they were coming since yesterday, when I caught the eye of a scout mixed into the crowd and saw in his fate a clear sequence of events: capture, escort, success. The person being captured in that vision was wearing clothes just like mine. I had one night to disappear. I went nowhere. I just sat in my small rented room with its 4 bare walls, watching the lamp burn from dusk until nearly dawn. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't try to run from the question I'd never dared answer honestly. The door burst open. Soldiers flooded in, sealing off all 4 sides. I stood in the middle of the room without moving. The commander looked at me with the eyes of someone used to arresting people who resist, clearly not used to someone standing there already waiting. "Are you the prophet?" I looked at him. 41 days, take me. I held out my hands to be bound and thought, 10 years. It's finally come to this. The road back to the capital was long, with nothing to look at but open fields and sky. I sat in the escort wagon, hands bound, back straight, the mortal eye opening naturally out of old habit. The soldier riding on the left, 112 days. The one walking behind, 240 days. None of them would die because of me. The curse won't let me die before others. I've understood that for a long time. I've tried enough ways and failed enough times that I don't try anymore. But tonight, for the first time, I'm not thinking about the curse. I'm thinking about what the drunk said at that roadside tavern. The king is looking for the prophet. Why? Someone with absolute power, sitting on the highest throne in the land. What day of death could they need to know so badly they'd send people searching everywhere? I close my eyes and don't try to answer, because I'm afraid I already knew the answer before the question was ever asked. I don't remember the first time I met him, Khai. There was no first time. He was just there, as if he'd always been there, as if the two of us had been placed in the same spot before either of us had a choice in the matter. Yunrim, the village in the mountains, where the clouds hung lower than the rooftops on mornings and children learned early an unwritten rule. Don't look directly into the eyes of someone with the mortal eye, don't ask what they see, don't let them look at you too long. That tradition existed before I was born, from a time when there were more people like us in the village. Now there were only the two of us. Only Khai and I would dare sit facing each other on the porch and stare deliberately into each other's eyes. Because when two mortal eyes met, they canceled each other out, no days, no death, just the person sitting in front of you. We figured that out ourselves, no one taught us, and we kept it like a secret that belonged only to us. He'd tilt his head and ask, voice barely a whisper but still somehow smiling, "So Yun, what do you see when you look into my eyes? Only you." He'd smile, the kind of smile he couldn't hold back, a little embarrassed but showing through anyway, me too. For the first time in my life, I looked at someone and didn't see the day they would be gone. Then I was the one who made him disappear. The capital appeared through the morning haze, larger than I'd imagined and colder than I'd prepared for. The escort wagon passed through the main gate. People on both sides of the road stopped to look, then looked away the moment they saw the imperial flags. The kind of averted gaze that belongs to people who have learned that looking at things that aren't their business is dangerous. I know that feeling. When the wagon passed through the palace gates, I looked up. Stone dragons carved along the roof ridges, each scale sharp as the real thing, mouths open toward the sky. I wonder when people started using dragons to decorate the places the living inhabit. Creatures of legend standing guard over people made of flesh and bone, my hand closed at my side. Not from fear, but because there was something in the air here, vague, nameless, like the scent of somewhere familiar that I was certain I'd never been. That made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't try to explain it. I just sat still, let the feeling pass, and reminded myself that I came here to end something, not to begin anything new. They left me waiting in a small room near the Great Hall, unbound but with soldiers posted outside the door. An elderly eunuch came in and served tea. His hands trembled slightly as he set the cup down, I assumed from age, but when he looked up at me, I paused. There was something. Nothing clear, nothing I could grasp, just a faint trace, like catching the scent of something familiar in the wind, gone before you've even registered, you smelled it. I looked at him. 216 days, an old face, nothing like anyone I remembered. But those eyes that were looking at me the way you look at something you've been carrying so long you no longer know where to put it down. I didn't recognize him. But the way he looked at me left me unsettled in a way I couldn't explain. He bowed his head, stepped back, and left without a word. I watched until his silhouette disappeared behind the door and sat back with the still warm cup of tea, that nameless unease refusing to fade. The doors of the great hall opened. I walked in. The mortal eye opened naturally, the way breathing does. I didn't force it, didn't need to. It just runs underneath everything else in me, always. My gaze swept the rows of officials standing in two lines, dates rising above each head in turn, some longer, some shorter, nothing unusual. Then I looked up at the throne and stopped. Nothing, not a single number. Not a single image. No days, no months, just a complete blankness, like looking at a space where something should be but isn't. 10 years, and the mortal eye had never once shown me nothing, not once, except for one person. I stood in the middle of the great hall in front of the entire court and felt my heart beat differently. Not fear, not hope, but something caught between the two with no name of its own. There is only one reason the mortal eye can't see. The person across from you carries it too. I stood in the great hall and let that thought move through my mind once, slowly and clearly, the way you reread a sentence to make sure you've understood it right. Two mortal eyes facing each other, they cancel each other out. No days, no death. I knew that from when I was still a child sitting on the porch in Yunrim, looking into the eyes of the only person in the world whose fate I couldn't see. That person died 10 years ago, died because of me. But the person seated on that throne, no death, no fate, nothing at all before the mortal eye. I reminded myself to breathe evenly, reminded myself to show nothing on my face, and told myself I might be wrong, that there are things I don't know. That the world is wider than our mountain village, and not everything has such a simple explanation. But I knew I wasn't wrong. The king opened his eyes, slowly, like someone returning from somewhere very deep, or like someone who knows they don't need to hurry because nothing in the world can reach them without their permission. He looked down, and looked straight at me. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. I felt the shift in the air without turning my head. This was the kind of silence that belongs to people watching something they recognize as important without understanding why. What do you see? His voice was low and level, not arrogant, not threatening. Just a question set down in the middle of the room the way you'd set down something heavy. I kept my eyes straight, didn't waver, didn't step back. Nothing. That was what I showed. Inside, in that place that had been cold and still and dark for 10 years. I was asking something I was both afraid of and needed answered more than anything. Is it you, Khai? The royal decree came down immediately, fast enough that I understood this wasn't a decision made in the Great Hall today. This was a decision that already existed before I walked in. The prophet was to remain in the palace. Appointed national advisor. Given private quarters in the eastern wing, unconfined, unbound, only required to stay. The officials in both rows stirred quietly, the kind of stirring that belongs to people who can't speak loudly but can't hold it in. I knelt to receive the decree. I bowed until my head touched the floor, and in that moment when no one could see my face, I closed my eyes, not from fear, not from relief, but because something in my chest had just tightened in a way I hadn't prepared for, and I needed a second to decide what I was going to do with it. I chose to put it aside, stood, stepped back, walked out evenly, and didn't look back at the throne. I couldn't sleep that first night in the palace, not because the place was unfamiliar. 10 years of wandering, I'd slept in stranger places than this. It was because the room was too quiet, and that quiet had a different weight than the quiet of open fields or mountain forests. This was the quiet of a place people had deliberately created, and underneath it, something was waiting. I sat by the window, looking out at the dark palace courtyard. Red lanterns hung along the corridor, swaying gently in the breeze, light and shadow trading places continuously, neither one winning out over the other. I sat like that for a long time. Then I breathed out, slowly, long, and spoke into the darkness in a voice that could no longer hold the steadiness it managed during the day. I'm here. Khai. Nothing answered, of course nothing answered. But for the first time in 10 years, I said that name out loud and didn't feel the urge to flee from myself right after. The next morning I was summoned to the king's private study, not the great hall, no attendants, no guards standing inside the room, just the two of us. Manhwa sat behind the desk, a thick stack of documents in front of him, unopened. He watched me walk in, let me stand still for a moment, not to assert authority, but the way someone measures a distance before deciding whether to take another step. Your curse, he said. Tell me about it, voice flat, like asking about the weather. I stood across from him and answered just as evenly because we were both pretending. He pretended this was the first time he'd wanted to know. I pretended this was the first time I'd been asked this by this particular person. We both knew the other was pretending, but no one broke it yet. It wasn't time, and I was patient enough to wait, because the last 10 years had been nothing but waiting. Someone who carries the mortal eye and betrays another person with the same ability, I said, gets locked to this world. They cannot die. Manhwa said nothing. His fingers had been tapping lightly against the edge of the desk. They stopped. It sounds simple, I continued, but it isn't. I looked down at my hands, old scars layered over each other, white and silent. 10 years of trying every method and failing every time. The body still feels everything the way a normal person does. Pain, illness, injury, nothing changes, except none of it can end. Pain has no stopping point. Exhaustion has no place to rest, and the only person who could forgive me is dead, so I live, not because I want to, but because I'm not allowed to die. I looked up directly at him. Every morning I wake up is one more day carrying something that has nowhere to be set down. No end. No other condition. Complete silence in the room. Manhwa looked at me, not with the eyes of someone hearing a strange story, but with the eyes of someone recognizing something painfully familiar. I could hold up under that gaze. 10 years had taught me how to stand straight before things that should have broken me. "Is there anything else your majesty would like to know?" He looked away. "No, you may go." I bowed and turned. As I walked out of the study door, I thought, he didn't ask about the curse because he didn't already know. He asked because he wanted to hear me say it out loud myself. This game still had a long way to go. That night I lay in my room staring at the ceiling, remembering the first time we understood what our mortal eyes really were, not from adults. No one in the village ever spoke about it directly. They only taught through rules and silence. We figured things out ourselves, by trying, by getting it wrong. Khai was the one who tried more. One afternoon, he pulled me behind the warehouse, where no one would pass, and spoke with the earnest gravity of a child who had just convinced himself he'd discovered the most important thing in the world. "I think I know why we don't see anything when we look at each other." "Why?" "Because two identical things cancel each other out. Like fire meeting fire, neither one wins." I looked at him, saw his eyes light up in that particular way that only happened when he was excited about something, and even if the theory sounded a little naive, I knew he was right. "So what are we to each other?" He tilted his head, thinking it through, very serious. "Each other's blind spot," he said. "The one place the mortal eye can't see." I didn't know then that I would carry that phrase through the next 10 years. Not because it was correct about the ability, but because somehow it was correct about everything else. He was my blind spot. In the most literal sense. And in the sense that I couldn't see, I was losing him until it was already too late. I found the small shrine on the third afternoon in the palace, when I wandered into the garden behind the rear hall where no one passed. It sat hidden behind a thick stand of bamboo, small enough to overlook if you weren't paying attention. Old wooden door, low tiled roof, no sign of any kind outside. I stood at the entrance for a moment, then pushed it open. Inside was a nameless white memorial tablet. No name, no dates, just a white wooden slab standing upright on a small altar with a plate of fresh flowers in front that hadn't yet wilted. Someone had changed them recently, and beside the tablet, a pale blue square of silk, folded neatly, placed there with the care of something precious. I looked at that silk and couldn't breathe for a moment. That shade of blue, the color of mountain streams at morning, the color the people of Yunrim used because the dye was cheap and lasting, was a color I hadn't seen in 10 years, because there was no one left to wear it. I stood in the small shrine and didn't move any closer, because I knew that if I touched that silk, something in me wouldn't hold anymore, and I wasn't ready for that. Not here, not alone. I didn't hear footsteps. There was simply another shadow behind me, and the air in the small shrine shifted in a way that's hard to explain, like the moment before rain when no drops have fallen yet, but your skin has already felt it coming. I didn't turn around. Manhwa said nothing. We stood like that, him behind me in front of the nameless white tablet, and the silence stretched in the way that belongs to a silence no one wants to break, because breaking it would mean admitting why you're standing there. The candle inside the shrine flickered. I looked at the wall and saw our shadows cast together as one shape, the line between them blurred, unclear where mine ended and his began. I looked at that shape longer than necessary, then looked down at the pale blue silk on the altar, and decided not to ask anything, because there are questions where both people already know the answer, and asking them aloud is just a way of forcing the other person to lie. "Do you ever miss anyone?" He asked it quietly, not a king speaking to a subject, not someone conducting an inquiry. Just a question from someone standing in a small shrine at dusk and not knowing where else to put it. I didn't turn my head. Every day, not one day missed. The room was quiet. The candle still burned. Outside, the wind moved through the bamboo, faint and far away. I didn't ask him back because his answer didn't need to be spoken. He kept fresh flowers before the nameless tablet. He kept a square of pale blue Yunrim silk on the altar. He remembered in the way of someone who has little left to do but remember. I heard his footsteps behind me. He turned and began to walk away, then stopped. A short pause, barely noticeable, then continued, past the shrine door and out of sight without looking back. I stood alone in front of the nameless white tablet, and thought, people always say souls inhabit familiar things. I wonder if a soul living inside someone else's body can still remember the smell of the place it used to be. 2 days later, in a court session where I stood at the far edge of the room according to the new custom, one of the ministers presented a petition. I couldn't hear all of it, only enough. Dark arts bewitching the emperor must be dealt with before it corrupts the court. I stood still, looking forward, my expression unchanged. I didn't even need the mortal eye to know how this would go. Manhwa received the petition, read it, and set it down gently. No throwing, no tearing, no visible anger. That composure was more frightening than any outburst could be. "How many years have you served in court?" The minister looked up, clearly not prepared for that question. "Your Majesty, 22 years. 22 years, Manhwa repeated, voice neither rising nor falling, and still not careful with your words. The decree came immediately, dismissed from position, no further explanation. The entire hall held its breath. I watched the minister kneel to receive the decree, his face drained of color, and thought, he didn't do it for me. He did it because he doesn't need anyone else interfering in what he's doing, whatever that may be. Those are two entirely different things. But the result is the same, and I have no right to pretend I don't see that. That night I couldn't sleep, and I walked the corridor alone until my feet stopped in front of the door to his study. The light inside was still on. It was late, past the third watch, possibly more. I stood outside, about to turn back. Then I looked through the narrow gap in the door, just a reflex, not intentional. Manhwa stood in the middle of the room, not sitting, nothing in his hands. His hand was pressed against his left chest, not in pain, not in discomfort. He just placed it there and held it still, eyes closed, lips moving without sound. Like someone trying to hear something very small and very far away, something that any noise might erase. I watched and couldn't look away. Because I knew what he was listening for, or more precisely, where he was listening. The place where a heartbeat should be. The place where this body, before it became a vessel for something else, was once a living person. He stood like that for a long time. I also stood like that for a long time on the other side of the door, in the dark of the corridor, my hand pressed to my own chest without knowing when I'd put it there. My heartbeat was still there. And I didn't know whether that should make me feel fortunate, or whether it was simply one more reminder that I don't deserve what I still have. We were caught when we'd sneaked out to play, slipping through the gap in the fence behind the warehouse, down the footpath along the base of the mountain, just like every other time. The Grand Chancellor's soldiers were already waiting. It wasn't a coincidence. My hands were seized before I had time to understand what was happening. Khai was shoved to the ground beside me. He didn't cry out, just lifted his head to look at me once and then turned to look at the soldiers. I knew what he was doing. "Which one of you is the prophet?" He didn't answer. He was looking, not with ordinary eyes. And in that pause, I watched his expression shift in a way I knew immediately. He was seeing something. He looked at me and saw nothing, because two mortal eyes cancel each other out, same as always. I knew that in that moment he still had hope. Not because he was naive, but because I was the one blind spot in his sight, and that blankness meant there was still a chance he was wrong. He waited. Then my hand went up. My hand was trembling. He could see it, but I still pointed. No words, no explanation, just 1 second that I haven't been able to take back no matter how many years I've tried. Khai looked at that hand, then he looked at my face. I didn't dare look back. In the interrogation room, no one bothered to tie me up anymore. The Grand Chancellor asked about the upcoming coup. Khai looked into the man's eyes, then smiled. He laid everything out, word by word, steady and clear. The coup would succeed, the Chancellor would be dead within a year, killed by his own son. The color drained from the Chancellor's face. The order came immediately. I stood in the corner of the room. My feet wouldn't move. My mouth wouldn't open. Before the blade fell, Khai turned and looked at me, not angry, not pleading. Just looked, the way someone looks at something they're memorizing for the last time. Then his lips moved without sound. I could read every word because I knew how his mouth moved from when we were still children. "You have to still be alive when I come back," The blade fell. In the chaos that followed, I ran. I ran until I stopped and saw the sky in the direction of the mountain glowing red. I stood and watched until the fire died and there was only smoke. There was nowhere left to go back to. Manhwa invited me to dinner for the first time, not a summons, an invitation. The meal was laid out in the study. 2 people, 1 table, candlelight. I sat and watched. He took food with his chopsticks, placed it in his mouth, chewed, steady and normal. But there was no sense that he actually needed to do any of it. Like someone recalling how to eat rather than someone who was hungry. I set my chopsticks down. Are you not hungry, or can you not be? He paused. Not from surprise, but because he hadn't yet decided how he was going to answer. Outside, the breeze passed lightly through the window. The candle swayed once, then steadied. Manhwa set his chopsticks down and looked directly at me. For the first time since I'd entered this palace, nothing in front of it, no safe distance maintained. Beneath that thick layer of cold, something was cracking from the inside. Very small, very slow, but cracking for real. I recognized it immediately because I'd seen it in the mirror for 10 years. He looked away first. Eat. I picked up my chopsticks and ate alone while he sat there doing nothing, returned to being the person I'd met in the Great Hall that first day, cold and far. But that moment just now, I held it inside carefully, the way you hold something that breaks easily. The next morning I entered the study without being summoned. Manhwa looked up when I walked in, didn't ask why I was there, didn't order me out. Just looked, then set his brush down. I stood across from him and didn't circle around it. I came here to die by your hand. I've known that since the day I received the summons. Silence. Outside the window came the distant sound of birds, people moving below in the courtyard, the sounds of a place where the living continue ordinarily to live. Manhwa's face didn't change. But his hand resting on the desk, I saw his fingers close once, very slightly, then release. I said nothing more. Enough had been said, the rest belonged to him to do with what he would. I bowed my head, turned, and walked out. He called me back before my hand reached the door. You want me to kill you? Not a question. I turned around. He was still behind the desk, hands relaxed now, eyes looking at me in a way I was increasingly coming to recognize, not the eyes of a king, not someone questioning. Only you can do it. I said, not because of the curse is just the condition. The real reason. I paused for a beat. I don't want to leave in front of a stranger. He listened to that and said nothing more. Just looked at me, and in that silence there was something being weighed, something that carried far more than a normal answer would. I stood still and waited. He looked away first. You may go. That night he came to my room. No knock, the door just opened and he stood there in the dark of the corridor, looking in. I was sitting by the window as I did every night, the lamp still lit, unable to sleep. I didn't stand. He stepped inside and stood in front of me, closer than the distance a king and a subject should keep. I didn't move back. There was no reason to move back, and I no longer had the energy to pretend I didn't know what was happening. He raised his hand. I sat still. Let the hand rise, hold in the air, then lower, stopping just before it touched my face. The air between us thickened in a way I have no words for. Go. Low voice. Not an order, the kind of sentence from someone trying to keep something from spilling out. I stood and left. The door closed behind me. I stood just outside, my back against the wooden door, my hand pressed to my own chest, where my heart was still beating, steady and relentless, the way it had for 10 years without ever being allowed to stop. I didn't know whether I should be glad about that, or whether it was only one more thing I didn't deserve. The assassin came on the 17th night I'd been in the palace. I never sleep before the 4th watch, so I heard the tiles shift slightly, heard someone land in the inner courtyard too quietly for a regular guard. I knew he wasn't the one who would kill me. Yesterday I'd happened to catch the eyes of a stranger standing near the rear gate. His death didn't fall on tonight, and not by my hand, so I lay still on the bed and waited. The window was pushed open. A figure dropped into the room, a blade catching the darkness. Then the door opened. Manhwa walked in, unhurried, silent, empty-handed. He simply walked in, and within seconds the assassin was on the floor. No one could quite have said how. The room settled back into quiet so fast it was almost as if nothing had happened. He looked at me still lying in the bed. "You knew he was coming?" Not a question. "Yes," I said simply. "He wasn't going to kill me, there was nothing to do." He didn't say anything more about the assassin. He turned to leave and I saw it. His right hand, along the outer edge of the palm, a long gash. Under normal circumstances, blood would have been flowing by now, but there was no blood. Only the wound, the skin split open, pale as wax, no red beneath. "Your hand." He stopped and looked down at it 1 second, no more. Then pulled the hand back into his sleeve and kept walking. "It's nothing." The door closed. I sat up and looked down at my own hand, still warm, still flushed, still bleeding the way normal people bleed when they're hurt. A dead body doesn't bleed, I knew that before I came here. But knowing and seeing it are two different things. Tonight, looking at that bloodless white wound, I finally understood the way he exists inside this body, not living, just not yet gone. The old eunuch knocked at my door before the sky had fully lightened. I opened it. He stood there, both hands holding a small object wrapped in rough cloth, saying nothing, just held it out and bowed, the way someone would with something that weighs more than its size suggests. I took it. The cloth came apart. Inside was a small piece of wood no bigger than a palm with 2 carp carved into the face, the lines uneven and unpracticed, the kind made by someone new to a carving knife and trying too hard. I stood there looking at it without moving. At 13, I sat behind the warehouse an entire afternoon to finish carving this. Khai sat beside me watching, occasionally offering suggestions that I waved off because he suggested too much. In the end, I gave it to him and told him to keep it because I had nowhere to put it. He actually kept it. I looked up, the old eunuch was already gone. The corridor was empty, the sky just light enough to see by. I looked back at the wood in my hands. My fingers traced the carved lines, following each uneven stroke of those 2 carp from 10 years ago. I found him in the morning, watering flowers in the garden behind the rear hall, alone, no one else around. "Where are you from?" He set the watering vessel down. He didn't look surprised, as if he'd known I would ask, just not when. "Yunrim," he said. I stood still. He turned to look at me, the eyes of someone who has been carrying something too long and no longer has the strength to keep it intact. The night the village burned, I was at the base of the mountain, didn't make it up in time. His voice was level, the kind of level that comes from having replayed something so many times in your head that you no longer feel anything saying it aloud. The one inside found me not long after, brought me into the palace. He looked down at the piece of wood in my hands. "And gave me that, told me to wait for the right moment. Does he know who you are?" He was quiet for a moment. "He does," the old man said. I recognized him immediately the first time we met, even though the body wasn't his. I walked back to my room alone, the piece of wood in my hand. Khai didn't need to tell me he was in there. I'd known from the very first day I walked into the great hall, from the complete blankness when the mortal eye looked up at the throne and found nothing. This piece of wood wasn't a confirmation, it was a question. "You already know, so what are you going to do now?" 10 years I'd been looking for him so I could die in front of him, so I could set down what I'd been carrying since the day my hand went up to point at him. I thought I knew why I'd come here, but standing in the palace corridor with the carved carp in my hands, I realized there were things I hadn't accounted for. He wasn't simply waiting for me to come so he could kill me. He was waiting to see what I would do. I went to the study in the late afternoon when the sunlight fell at an angle through the windows and half the room lay in shadow. Manhwa was reading documents. He didn't look up when I entered. I set the piece of wood on the table directly in front of him. Said nothing. He glanced down at it, just a brief look, the kind you'd give anything placed in front of you. But I saw his jaw tighten for a fraction of a second, small enough to almost miss, then release. He didn't look up, I didn't sit. I just stood there. Outside the window, the light was fading, shadows spreading from the corners of the room. No one spoke for a long stretch of time. Then he set his brush down. His right hand rested on the table, beside the wood but not touching it, just placed there, still, like someone trying to hold one fixed point while everything around them shifts. I looked at that hand and understood the unspoken agreement between us had just come to an end. Khai? I said the name out loud for the first time in 10 years, not whispered into the dark by myself, but spoken clearly, directly, into the air between two people. The name fell into the middle of the room like something heavy. Manhwa didn't move immediately. Sat still, hands still on the table, eyes still looking down, through a silence long enough for me to hear the faint crackle of candles in the corridor. Then he closed his eyes, and when they opened, his voice had changed. Not much, not enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed, because I knew that voice before it ever became anyone else's. How long have you been here? Not a king's voice anymore. I stood in the middle of the palace study, looking at a stranger's face, and heard the voice of someone I'd known before I knew anything else in the world. I couldn't hold it together. I stepped forward, not a decision, not something I thought about. My feet just moved, and before I registered what I was doing, I was holding his hand in both of mine, cold. Colder than I expected. Not the cold of someone who'd been outside too long, but the cold of something no longer warmed from within. I held tight and didn't let go. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. 10 years I'd tried to find the right words and none of them were enough, so I just stood there, his hand in mine, shaking. He didn't pull away immediately. Just looked down at my hands holding his and said nothing through a long silence. Outside the window, the sky had gone fully dark. The candles burned low, our shadows stretching long across the wooden floor, and for the first time in 10 years I understood what had kept me here wasn't the curse. Not something invisible or some cosmic debt. It was him. Only him. Then he pulled his hand back, slowly, not a jerk, just withdrawing finger by finger until my hand had nothing left to hold. The cold mask settled back into place, the familiar distance dropping like a curtain, and the person sitting across from me became Manhwa again, not the one who had just asked, "How long have you been here?" Don't misread this. His voice was flat. Not angry, that flatness was more frightening than anger. "I haven't forgiven you. I didn't bring you here because I wanted to see your face." He looked directly at me. "I brought you here so you'd know what 10 years of waiting was for." I stood there with empty hands, no argument, no explanation. He was right, and I hadn't come here to debate what was right. He didn't stop there. That day I looked into the soldier's eyes. His voice was even, like someone recounting something that happened to another person, but I could hear what lived underneath the evenness. I saw in their fates an arrest, an escort, a success. Someone had to give us away. He looked down at the piece of wood on the table. I saw the hand of the person who did it, not the face. A pause. Then I looked at you and saw nothing, same as always. I knew what came next, but hearing him say it was different from knowing it myself. I waited, he said. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe that hand belonged to someone else. As long as you did nothing, I was wrong. The room went quiet. Then your hand went up. I was silent for a moment, then, "I know," he looked up. "I know you were waiting," I said. "I know you were hoping," and I still pointed. I looked straight at him, no looking away, no bowing my head the way I had that day. I pointed at you. I stood and watched the order come down. I told them where the village was and ran, and I watched the village burn from a distance because I didn't have the courage to go back. Khai said nothing. "I didn't come here to make excuses," I continued. "There are no excuses. I came because you're the only one left who can end this, and because I don't want to carry this one more day." Silence stretched on. He looked at me, not the eyes of a king, not an enemy. Just looking, the way you look when you're hearing something you already knew but needed to hear out loud to believe. I knew from the beginning that I would forgive you. His voice had gone quieter. I saw it ahead of time, as clearly as I see anything else, but I couldn't not come. He paused. Because knowing in advance doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. I stood still. There was nothing left to add. He had just said the part that belonged to both of us. He didn't stand, didn't move toward the door. He just sat looking at the space in front of him, and after a while asked in the voice of someone finally saying something they'd held in a long time. "Do you know what I saw in the moment your hand went up?" I didn't answer. "I saw your face." He didn't look at me as he said it. No days, no months, just your face looking toward me then turning away. A pause. That's the only thing I carried with me until I died. The room was quiet. I didn't know what to do with that. There was no way to receive it without pain and no way to give it back to him. So I just stood there and let it lie between the two of us, no one picking it up, no one pushing it away. Outside, the night had fully come. The palace had begun to light up, pale yellow light filtering through the gap in the window, falling on the carved carp still lying on the table where no one had moved it. The rain came at midnight without warning. I was lying in my room listening to the water against the roof tiles when someone knocked at my door, not a soldier, not the old eunuch. Just one knock, quiet, audible only if you were still awake. I opened the door. Manhwa stood in the corridor, no explanation for why he was there. I didn't ask. We walked to the end of the corridor where there was a wide window looking out onto the inner courtyard and sat on either side of it, backs against the wall, watching the rain fall on the wet stones below. No one said anything for a long time. I remembered, back in Yunrim when we were young, on rainy nights like this we'd sneak up to the warehouse roof and sit looking down over the village. Khai would count the thunder, I'd fall asleep and he'd push me awake. We kept doing it long after we were old enough to know it was dangerous. I don't know if he remembers. But he was the one who knocked on my door on a rainy night, and that told me more than anything he could have said. The rain was still falling when I started to speak, not because I was asked, not because it was the right time, just because sitting beside him in the dark listening to rain, I no longer had the strength to hold it. I started from the beginning, the day we were caught, the moment the soldier asked his question, my hand going up. No explaining why, no searching for reasons to make it sound less terrible than it was. Just what happened in the order it happened, then the night watching the village burn. Not being able to make myself walk back up that mountain even though my legs were working and the road was still there. 10 years after that, not 10 years of living, but 10 years of existing because there was nothing else I was permitted to do. He listened without turning his head, eyes still on the rain outside. I spoke until there was nothing left to say, then stopped, looked out the window and let the sound of the rain fill the space I just left behind. Silence held for a while after I finished, only the rain, steady, unhurried, indifferent to whatever was happening inside this room. Then he asked without turning, "Do you regret it?" "There isn't a day I don't regret it," I said. "Including today." He didn't say anything more. No forgiveness, no further accusation, no standing up to leave. Just sitting there watching the rain, his shoulder less than a hand's width from mine, close enough that I could feel the cold coming off that body, cold and still like the night outside. I don't know what he was thinking. But he didn't leave, and tonight, for me, that was enough. Nothing more, nothing less. Just him sitting there and not leaving. The rain kept falling until close to morning. I knew about the council's plan 3 days before they moved. Not from overhearing anything, not from anyone telling me, only because I happened to catch the eyes of a palace guard near the east gate and saw in his fate an unusual sequence of events. Darkness, the rear gate, someone being carried away. The person being carried was wearing the national advisor's robes. I said nothing to Manhwa, not because I wanted it to happen, but because I wanted to see. 10 years I'd been reading other people's fates, and this was the first time I wanted to let a sequence of events play out in front of me without interfering, without adjusting anything. I wanted to see what Manhwa would do when he found out. So I sat in my room, drank tea, and waited. Calm the way someone becomes calm after years of knowing things ahead of time and learning that waiting costs nothing as long as you don't fight it. Manhwa didn't summon the council into the Great Hall. He called them one by one, individually, into the study at different hours of the day. I had no idea what happened inside each meeting because no one said and I didn't ask. I only saw them emerge one after another, faces drained, steps unsteady, eyes fixed ahead like people who had just seen something they couldn't set down. No arrests, no blood, no sentences. He simply looked into each person's eyes and told them the day they would die. I heard this from the old eunuch that evening. He told it in the voice of someone who had witnessed something and wasn't sure whether to be afraid or to feel awe. After that, no one in the council looked in my direction again. I sat in my room looking out the window and thought, He used the mortal eye to protect me. The thing we both carried, the secret between two children on a porch, the thing that didn't leave him even in death, he used it for me. The following night, I passed the study and saw the lamp still burning. I stopped, looked through the gap, old reflex, same as the night 3 weeks ago. Khai sat at the table, not reading, not doing anything. Just sitting there looking at the carved carp lying on the surface, hands resting on either side, back straight, like someone sitting before something that needs to be looked at long enough to be understood. I stood outside and watched him. In the pale yellow lamplight, his face no longer wore the coldness I'd grown used to seeing since arriving at the palace. Not warmer, just more tired. The kind of tired that belongs to someone who has been carrying something so long they've begun to forget what they were carrying it for. I recognize that hatred, when it's fresh, is sharp and certain. But 10 years is a long time, enough to wear down anything, even what people assume will never wear down. He sat there not knowing I was outside looking in. I didn't go in either, just stood there a while, then walked back to my room. The night after I walked in without knocking, he looked up at me, didn't ask why I was there, didn't tell me to leave. Just looked for a second, then looked back at the table. The wood was still there. I pulled a chair and sat down on the other side, said nothing. He said nothing. The candles burned low, our shadows falling long across the wooden floor in 2 separate directions. After a while, he pushed the carved wood to the middle of the table, not toward me, not kept on his side. Just placed it exactly in the center. I looked at that gesture and said nothing. We sat like that for a stretch of time no one counted. Not a comfortable silence, not a tense one, just the silence of 2 people growing used to being in the same room without needing a specific reason. The distance between us narrowed gradually. No one noticed when, no one did it deliberately. But at some point, I realized his shoulder was much closer to mine than it had been when I first sat down. The sky was beginning to lighten when he spoke. If I forgive you, you disappear. Not a question. A statement, the kind from someone who has sat with something for a long time and finally says it aloud. Yes, I said. He looked directly at me. Is that what you want? I didn't answer right away. Outside the window, the sky was shifting from black to gray, that narrow window before real morning, when everything is still shapeless but no longer fully dark. I sat looking out at it and let his question rest in the air a little while before answering. I want to rest, I said. 10 years is too long to carry something with nowhere to put it down. He was quiet. And I want the last person I see to be you. I looked at him. Not a stranger, not alone, you. The room was still. Outside, the first light of the new day was beginning to come through the edge of the window, faint, slow, as if reluctant to interrupt whatever was happening inside this room. That night I lay in my room remembering an afternoon in Yunrim. Nothing particular about it. Just one of hundreds of identical afternoons that I can no longer tell apart in my memory. We were running on the slope of the mountain, no reason, nowhere to go, just running because we had the energy and the light was still good. Khai ran ahead, I ran behind, wild grass catching at our shins and neither of us caring. Then he stopped suddenly and turned to look at me. I didn't stop in time, I ran straight into him and we both went down in the grass, laughing like nothing in the world was serious anymore. Lying on our backs looking up at the sky, he asked, "What do you see?" I knew he wasn't asking about the sky. I turned my head to look at him and saw nothing beyond him, same as always. No days, no death, nothing I hadn't wanted to see. Just Khai lying beside me on the mountainside, grass tangled in his hair, waiting for an answer. "Only you," I said. He smiled. Closed his eyes, let the afternoon light fall across his face. I lay there looking at him for a long time and had no idea that this was one of the last times I would look at him like this. No idea that just a few months later, everything would be different forever. No one knows things like that ahead of time, even with the mortal eye. He said it on an ordinary morning while I was sitting by the window in the study and he was standing looking out at the courtyard. This body won't last. I didn't turn around, but my hand stopped on the page I'd been reading. When a dead body is occupied by a soul from outside, it deteriorates from within. His voice was flat, the way someone sounds when talking about weather or about someone else's affairs. slowly, but it can't be stopped. You knew from the beginning, I said, not a question, yes. I looked down at the page, the words were still there, but I couldn't read them anymore. You chose this body for the power, I said. The throne, the court, enough strength to find me, not exactly. He turned to look at me. I chose this body because it gave me enough time. Nothing more, nothing less, just enough to find you again. The room was quiet. I looked at him standing there in the morning light, someone else's face, someone else's body, and thought that he had calculated this before I knew I was going to be found. That afternoon I looked into his eyes, not for the first time. I'd looked into his eyes many times since arriving at the palace. But this time I truly looked without shielding myself, without pulling back quickly, and I saw, not the complete blankness from before. The white space, the thing I'd grown used to seeing ever since two children sat on a porch and discovered their secret, was blurring at the edges. Fading, like ink meeting water, no longer as sharp as it had been in those first days. The mortal eye in him was weakening with the body. I didn't need to see any more clearly to understand what that meant. He was still looking at me, unaware of what I'd just seen. I kept my face still, nothing showing, nothing asked, and looked back at him the way you look at something you're trying to memorize before you lose it. A stranger's face. But those eyes, the way he looked, the way his gaze rested on my face, they belonged to the person I had known before I knew anything else. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen. I just reached out, set my hand gently on top of his where it rested on the table, not gripping, just placing it there. Cold, the way it always was when I touched him. The cold of something no longer warmed from within. He looked down at my hand. Said nothing, didn't pull back, just looked longer than necessary, the way someone looks at something they aren't sure they have the right to keep. Then he turned his hand palm up slowly. Finger by finger, and when his hand was fully open, his fingers laced through mine, cold into warm, silence into silence. No more words were spoken. Outside the window, the afternoon was fading. The last light of the day came in at an angle, falling across the two hands joined on the table, one white and still, one still warm, and no one broke it. After a while he spoke without looking up. I remember your hand. I didn't ask him when or in what way. That day your hand was shaking when you raised it to point at me. Yes, I said. It shook the whole time and I still pointed. He was quiet for a beat, I know. His fingers closed a little tighter around mine. I saw both things at once, the hand shaking and still going up. I said nothing. There was nothing to add. It was already enough. It already held everything. 10 years I'd lived with the memory of that second, and he'd lived with it too, only from the other side, watching what I'd done instead of watching his own hand rise. The same second. Two different sides. Outside, the sounds of the palace went on, the changing of guards, wheels on a distant road, the sounds of a place where the living continue living. Nothing there knew or cared what was happening in this room. He turned and looked at me. I knew immediately, not because anything on his face had changed, not because he spoke or did something different. Just the eyes, no longer the eyes of a king looking at a subject. No longer the eyes of an enemy looking at someone who had betrayed him. No longer the eyes of someone who had arrived with a plan and a purpose, and enough hatred to build a whole dynasty around. Just Khai, the child who used to sit across from me on the porch and ask, "So Yun, what do you see when you look into my eyes?" and laugh when I said I only saw him. The person who'd lain beside me on the mountainside, grass in his hair, eyes closed, letting the afternoon light fall across his face. The one who looked straight at me in the last moment before the blade fell and wasn't angry, just looked. I sat still and let those eyes reach me without turning away. This was what I had come here to find, not forgiveness, not death, not an ending. Just this, one more time to look at him like this with nothing between us. He didn't look away when he said it. No lead up, no preparation. He just sat there looking straight at me, hands still laced through mine, and said, "I forgive you." Quiet as a breath. The kind of thing that's been sitting in your mouth for a very long time and is finally being set down. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. It didn't need an answer, didn't need confirmation or gratitude or argument. It only needed to be heard, and I had heard it, every word in that silent room. Outside the window, the sky was still dark. But something in the air had shifted, invisible, inexplicable. Just a sudden sense that the room felt different from one second to the next. Like the moment before dawn, no light yet, but the dark no longer as dense as it had been. I sat still and breathed, slowly, evenly, and realized this was the first time in 10 years I had breathed without feeling something pressing down on my chest. I felt it when it began, not pain. I had prepared for pain, had imagined that 10 years of a curse releasing would feel like something being torn out from inside. But it wasn't like that, just lightness. Like a thread that had been pulled so taut for so long it had forgotten it was taut, and now, releasing one piece at a time, quietly, without rush. The thing that had kept me here for 10 years didn't leave with a sound. It just stopped. I looked down at my hand, still laced through his, still warm, still the same, but inside, something was slowing. Not my heart was still beating, steady and clear. Something else, deeper than the heart, something I don't have a name for but had carried with me from the night I stood watching Yunrim burn from a distance. That thing was letting me go, or I was letting it go. I wasn't sure which one was more accurate. And for the first time, I didn't need to be. His hand grew colder, I felt it. Not because he said so, not because I saw anything, only because my hand was holding his and the change passed through skin, slow and clear. He said nothing about it. No resistance, no effort to sit straighter, nothing to stretch it further. He only leaned, gently, gradually, and rested his head against my shoulder. I stayed still. That weight, lighter than I expected, lighter than a person should be, I recognized immediately. Back when we were young, after long, exhausting sessions of practicing our sight, he'd lean against my shoulder just like this. No asking, no permission, just tilting over and settling in like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Will you stay with me?" His voice was quiet. Not weak, just quiet, the kind of question that doesn't need to carry far, only needs to reach the person sitting beside you. "I'm here." I wrapped my arm around his shoulders and pulled him close, not hard, just enough for him to know I wasn't going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. My other hand rested on his chest, where there had been no heartbeat for a long time, where there was only the cold and silence of something that had stopped beating 10 years ago. I held it there and didn't pull away. He didn't say anything more, neither did I. We sat like that, him resting against my shoulder, me holding him with both hands, while outside the sky along the horizon began to shift, from black to gray to something without a name yet, that brief window before a new day fully begins. This time I'm not going anywhere. I didn't say it out loud, just held it in my chest, together with the weight leaning against my shoulder that was lighter than it should have been, and the sound of my own heartbeat slowing in a way that didn't hurt, wasn't frightening, just stopping, right time, right place, right person. Dawn came slowly. The first light came through the gap in the study window, faint, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it, then spread gradually across the wooden floor, up onto the table, falling on the small carved carp still lying there from the night before. The rough cut lines caught the early light faintly. The two shadows that had been leaning together by the window were no longer there. Nothing was disturbed, no strange wind, no sound, no sign of anything having ended. The room was only emptier than it had been at midnight, and the light kept spreading the way it always does, knowing nothing and needing to know nothing of what had passed inside this room the night before. The carved wood lay in the center of the table, exactly where no one had placed it toward themselves, where no one had taken it away. Outside, the capital was beginning to wake. The sound of guards changing shifts, a distant bell, the sounds of a day starting the way every other day starts. No one left alone, and this time no one left with regret. Khai forgave, but can forgiveness heal everything? 10 years of waiting, of hate held so long it wore itself down, and So Yun, having finally received what he had always sought, can he forgive himself? If it were you, do you think So Yun deserved to be forgiven? Or are there some wrongs once committed that cannot be undone? Let us know what you think in the comments.